the different setups like urban and in the rural settings as well. So with that, today here we come. So we are going to launch our interim reports, include the key findings of ANFREL International Election Observation Mission. I think you already have the report with you. And without taking much time, let me introduce our panel today, who's going to talk more about ANFREL International Election Observation Mission and also our findings as well. So we have Mr. Rohan Hettiarachchi. He's the head of the mission and also the chairperson of ANFREL. And also have the Ms. Brisa Rosales. She's the mission executive director for ANFREL International Election Observation Mission. And she is also the executive director of ANFREL. And with them, we have our two electoral analysts, Mr. Carlo Africa and Mr. Asanka Senadira. So then, without taking much time, I would like to hand over the floor to my colleagues. So they will talk more about the ANFREL mission and also our key findings, including the recommendations that ANFREL is forwarding, the immediate recommendations that ANFREL forwarding to all election stakeholders. Rohan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tarindu. Good morning, Excellencies, my civil society colleagues, media friends, and my fellow observers. Let me begin with congratulating for Bangladesh, the citizens of Bangladesh, and the Elections Commission of Bangladesh. For this is for their historic and landmark elections after 15 years. So this is the product of the Elections Commission. So we need to appreciate the elections management for these peaceful elections and their effort to make this happen within last 1.5 years. So the elections in overall, I will just go through briefly the overall assessment. My colleagues will go through substantial part. So the elections, considering free elections period, the elections day, and so far up to post-elections, the elections basically peaceful and orderly and also credible. We need to endorse that. It's really product of elections commissions. They work hard to deal with the law enforcement officers, having proper coordinations and assess the risks in the ground level and deploy the law enforcement officers during the pre-elections period as well as the elections day. And also, we wish to acknowledge and welcome the first time in, I think, Bangladesh history, they use this technology for elections. They have established CCTV camera, body cam, and also the postal voting. I think I was interviewed one of the presiding officer. He was very happy in the whole history. The first time he used his voting right for these elections. So I think, so all these things happen mainly because of the Elections Commission. And also, there are certain issues which we have identified in our pre-elections assessment and also the elections day, where integrity is challenged. Even though the elections day was peaceful, but violence was one of the critical issue. But I think compared with the Bangladesh history, and this time we all happy that less violence, but still it's a considerable issue. And then I think many of you have your own experience, or you may heard about money power, how this vote buying took place. Our observers has observed even on the polling day, there were some occasions, some places, they were trying to give money for voters. Then the muscle power. And one of the other critical area where we wanted to highlight campaign finance. The campaign finance which we learned even prior to the elections day, the TI Bangladesh has issued a report that 1/3 of the candidate has exceeded their limitations even before the elections, 5 days before the elections. So this is critical. I mean, if we think level playing field, so there should be proper implementations of campaign finance ceiling. And low priority or not inclusive the women's, youth, and marginalized group. Unfortunately, only 4%, the outcome of the elections, the women representations. We have realized that there are, out of 51 political party, those who contest the elections, the 30 party has not even single women on their list. The uprising began with the women and youth, but youth representation is also very low. And also we learned that some marginalized group, religious minorities, are not given an equal space in these elections. So those are some issues which we need to seriously consider in the future elections. And I will share a couple of other integrity issues. Weak complaint handling mechanism. For the elections, the complaint handling is very critical. And rapid response is very critical. So we learned that complaint handling is here weak. I think the Elections Commission has to seriously consider for future elections what is the mechanism for complaint handling. And on the elections day, the major issue which we have identified, accessibility of polling stations. It's generally acceptable, but the elderly people, the disabled people, we have seen, I have seen myself on the polling day, how difficult it is, how challenge they face to mark their ballot. We understand the situations here and across Asia even. The Elections Commission has to use the existing building for the polling places, for the polling stations. But at the same time, we have noticed some of these buildings, they use the upper floors for voting. It was a matter of bringing in, not all, it was a matter of bringing some tables and chairs to the ground floor. We have witnessed some places, there were some space for them to establish polling place in the ground floor, just to facilitate the elderly voters. Of course, the Elections Commission we have noticed they have given extra effort to facilitate that. In certain places, we have noticed they have a mechanism to support the elderly people and the disabled people, but still, that has to be considered. And the last point from me on that, we have noticed across the country that campaigning just outside the polling stations, they call it helping by the parties, but we have realized that it is part of the campaign. On the elections day, just outside the polling booth, it is not acceptable. It's not acceptable. And we have noticed that they took some small leaflet and take it to the polling stations also, the polling booth also, with the logo of the party, with the picture of the candidates, and everything. I mean, somebody can say that, okay, voter do have a choice to mark their ballot inside the booth. But, given the context of Bangladesh, given the context of Asian countries, I think there can be an influence on that. So those are some places where we have highly considered on integrity issues. Let me, so what is our recommendations? What is our recommendations for this election, for the future considerations? Full implementations of campaign finance law. I think Brisa will give you more extensive idea and address the gap. There are some gaps also. We have noticed that there is no proper format to submit the candidate for their income and expenditure report. Law enforcement, in generally, we have to have a proper mechanism to implement, because most of the countries we do have a law, but implementation is the big issue. The same with here. Follow-up action for elections complaints. That is also important for the future elections, to build the confidence of the people. And the more accessible for polling stations, that is, in the long run, we have to think how we are going to address that issue. Establish transparent and inclusive complaint handling mechanism. It should be inclusive and it should be transparent. Then only the political party and the stakeholders will build the trust on the complaint handling. So Election Commission has to seriously think about it. And legal and practical measures for improve the women's and youth political participations. I mean, a lot of countries are having some quota for women, quota for youth, but there are cultural barriers also. There are financial barriers also for the youth and women. There are so many barriers. I think the political party has to seriously think about it, how they include for the youth and women's for the future, their participations. More transparent mechanism for counting. Counting generally acceptable, but also we realize there are certain areas where we need to improve the transparency in counting process as well. Voter education in generally, yes, it has to seriously consider by the civil society as well as the elections, the management. Establish helping desks, as I mentioned earlier, outside the polling stations. It can be either elections commissions or either civil society or maybe together, the helping desks, rather than allowing political parties to campaign or helping voters just outside the polling stations. And what is next? So for me, this is new beginning of Bangladesh. The roadmap is very clear. It's the July Charter. And mandates has given by the people. That also very clear. The time frame also has given 180 days. It's very clear, pretty clear. Now it is duty of the new government. It is unconditional responsibility of the government. But of course, I think it's part of the responsibility of media and the civil society. So that is my last message. So I will pass to Riza for her presentation.
Thank you, Hannah. Good morning again, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. A lot of familiar faces because we've been here for at least 1 year, actually 1 year, working for the advancing electoral democracy in Bangladesh. So Rohana presented the overall key assessment, and I will now walk you through the findings that underpin the overall assessment based on the ANFREL's efforts across the electoral cycle. You have the copy already of our interim report, and it is divided into 7 sections. So let me walk through with you one by one. It's electoral administration, electoral accountability, inclusiveness, citizen observation, voter education, social media, information integrity, and governance. Of course, as highlighted, this is an election in which voters were not only choosing representatives. They were also testing whether institutions could regain credibility. So we begin with election administration. So of course, this outcome did not happen automatically. It reflected the visible operational planning by the Bangladesh Election Commission and their openness for development and technical assistance that we have seen very effective. And with other election stakeholders also, particularly security forces. We saw risk-based deployments, centralized monitoring, and technology-enabled oversight, which helped stabilize polling operations and made the process and system inclusive. In practical terms, on what we saw during election day, polling stations opened, voters queued, and procedures largely moved forward without widespread disruption. And this really contributed to a degree of immediate confidence while casting their ballots. Legal and regulatory framework. So of course, the framework contains the necessary provisions stemming from the RPO and then the guidelines produced and developed by the Election Commission. So rules governing the campaign period, the code of conduct for candidates and political parties, and regulations for media coverage. Of course, on paper, these are important safeguards meant to ensure a level playing field and allow voters to make informed choices. But of course, the credibility of rules depends on enforcement. And during the key informant interviews that we did, of course, stakeholders repeatedly told us that violations were reported, but remedies were still uncertain, delayed, or inconsistent. At the same time, the mission's interim findings point to a persistent integrity, and we are really hoping that we will be seeing this reform in the next or future elections in Bangladesh, because the challenge actually sits beneath orderly polling, and that's electoral accountability. Because across stakeholder engagements, confidence that violations would actually be sanctioned remained limited, particularly regarding money politics and campaign finance. So campaigning was widely described as costly, heavily mobilized, although we saw the posters, they're still black and white, but it's still costly and dependent on informal spending. So enforcement mechanisms were often viewed as uneven and sometimes unrealistic. So civil society monitoring reinforced these concerns because there were indications of a candidate overspending, including cases believed to have occurred even before the official campaign period ended. So even small things mattered, especially when we are talking about campaign finance, because such as visible campaign materials like posters, tarpaulins remaining despite regulations. And even on election day itself, but it was already highlighted by Rohana, we identified a concrete vulnerability connected to money politics. We really saw party-operated voter identification desks positioned outside or very near the polling stations. And these desks, just to describe it, they're giving away voter slips, sometimes bearing party logos and candidate photos. And in some cases, voters presented these slips upon entering the polling booth to polling agents. And this practice raises serious concern. Because even when no cash hands at the polling station, such verification mechanisms can be consistent with inducement arrangements because it increases the risk of improper influence because voters may feel their choice is being monitored. This can undermine free choice even when voting procedures look very orderly. Let's talk about security, of course. Election day was really calm in most areas, but stakeholders described the pre-campaign and campaign period as tense. It was characterized by intimidation and what they referred to as muscle power, often through local intermediaries rather than direct confrontation. And of course, this contrast matters on what we saw during pre-election and what we saw on election day. Because order on election day demonstrates effective deployment and deterrence, but confidence depends on whether earlier incidents are documented, investigated, and sanctioned. So we will follow through to know more about the progress in the incidents. So now let us turn to inclusiveness. So of course, participation showed both progress and persistent gaps. Of course, the voter roll reflected nearly a parity between men and women, and youth participation actually was visible, particularly first-time voters and youth mobilization. So this is an important indicator of democratic engagement. At the same time, as highlighted earlier, representation lagged behind participation. So at least just to differentiate the participation part and the representation part. Because women were severely underrepresented as candidates. And that pertains to the representation. And some parties nominated none at all. Minority and marginalized communities reported fear and inclusion in certain areas. Persons with disabilities face accessibility barriers, but we also acknowledge that this is infrastructural problem. And at the same time, there's a limited target voter education with regard to referendum. And I think that has been clearly apparent on election day because they're really confused. What's the meaning of yes and what's the meaning of no? So participation widened, but representation did not widen at the same pace. Information environment. So information environment was also highly active. So we did social media monitoring. So we have coded actually 9,000 posts, and we did it randomly, and we have coded 935 posts. So for us to assess what is happening during the campaign period, what are the activities of the political actors, and at the same time, the persistent narratives that you can see in the online space. So social media became a central arena for campaigning and narrative competition. So encouragingly, civic information and issue-based messaging outpaced manipulative content overall. So here are the recurring narratives that we saw in the social media space because we have collated the Facebook pages of different political parties and candidates, whether it's official or whether it's affiliate pages. So the recurring narratives about vote buying, intimidation, irregularities, and gender disinformation circulated, and manipulation became more sophisticated closer to election day. So this indicates, of course, a need for institutional response. So we hope that the Bangladesh Election Commission will focus more on this in the future elections, and of course, clearer response coming from the social media platforms. Okay, another important pillar of confidence, of course, citizen observation. We've been doing this for the past 28 years, that is for ANFREL, and stakeholders widely regarded the presence of domestic and international observers as reassuring. So observation acts as a transparency safeguard, but however, of course, we have highlighted this, the limitations that we face since last year with regard to accreditation guidelines. So we are really hoping that accreditation guidelines will be revised in future elections, defining clearly the definition of electoral processes, highlighting the difference between short-term observation, long-term observation, and the rights and responsibilities and obligations of domestic and international observers. Because as ANFREL, it differs, the mandate differs from the EU and the Commonwealth. We are representing civil society organizations, and we underwent the accreditation guidelines following all of the provisions and the conditions under the guidelines promulgated by the Election Commission. So we're hoping to see in the future elections that it will be amended, so it will be more inclusive and at least aligned with international standards. Lastly, please bear with me. So of course, with governance aspect, we situate this election in the broader governance context because in our interim assessment, the referendum result heightens expectations for reform follow-through. The pro-referendum vote strengthens the public mandate for reform. And the relative confidence observed on election day can be sustained only if post-election governance reinforces accountability. So when we mean accountability, we're pertaining to enforceable campaign finance oversight, clear complaint mechanisms, impartial investigations, and reforms that reduce incentives for patronage and coercion. So in other words, just a last few words before I end. Of course, orderly voting built the immediate confidence, but only accountability can build the lasting confidence. So again, our heartfelt congratulations to the people of Bangladesh, and we would like, of course, to acknowledge the efforts of all the stakeholders, particularly the Election Commission, our development partners, CSO partners, who have been here. I really appreciate the CSO partners that we worked for the past year. Security forces, of course, we still have, of course, the normal surveillance outside, media, civil society, and pro-democracy organizations, both domestic and international. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rohana and Breeza. So with that, I think we would like to open the floor for questions and answers. The questions from the media, I think we would like to invite only the media colleagues to raise your questions. So our panel is they are ready to answer your questions.
Hello. I shouldn't. Yeah.
Yes.
My name is Rashad. I'm from New Age. It's an English language newspaper based in Dhaka. I have a couple of questions. At first, I want to ask if any of your observers face any barriers to enter any polling station, particularly when the vote was counting after the polling. This is my first question. My second question is, so far from the Election Commission, it came to know that 60% of total votes are casted. So do you think it's a credible election, 60% without the representation of 40% people, 40% of the voters? Yeah. I am asking this question on the background that one of the major political party once, who is now banned in Bangladesh, the Awami League, boycotted this election. So do you think this representation of voters anyhow raise any question about the election? My third question, should I do?
Yes, yes, you can go ahead.
Election is a door to democracy. So far, after this election, we see the political parties raise some questions about some result of some constituencies as well. So the overall election mechanism, what happened here, do you think it's satisfactory? Thank you.
Okay, I think we can go for a couple of more questions from our media colleagues before panel answer the questions. Okay, all right. So let's go for the answer.
I'll answer the first two. We did not experience any limitation when accessing the voting, counting, actually with the overall process on election day. So we have access in observation. Turnout, of course, the turnout is very credible and acceptable. So of course, turnout alone does not determine the election quality. And of course, the focus is that there's a huge voter participation and there's an integrity in the procedure. So also with the recent turnout, we compared it with the history of turnout before. It is in line with the historical turnout patterns. So yeah, that's the two questions.
Yeah, just to add what Brisa said, as he correctly mentioned that the turnout is just one conditions. But I mean, we need to look at the contest, the political contest built over 1.5 decades here. And also, I think I have met number of voters who voted the first time in their marking their ballot last 15 years. Many youth, those who are in 30, in between even 30, 40, this is the first time they have marked their ballot. So this was really given a space in comparatively, a peaceful environment for them to mark their ballot. So that has to be recognized here. And the inclusiveness, of course, it will be much better if the turnout goes up to 75 to 80. But also need to consider when you calculate the turnout, you will base on the number of registered voters here. But there are millions of voters in outside the country. And we need to happy that the elections management has given a space for overseas voting and some voters, for those who are in the country also, those who are unable to go to their specific polling stations on the elections day, they have established the postal voting mechanism. So there are many factors which we have to consider. The inclusive part, yes, we accept that the Awami League's banding issue, but there should be a transitional justice and reconciliation process. Of course, the government has to seriously consider that part. I'm sure that future, this will be improved. So this is the beginning of the new democracy. Democracy is a journey. Election is just one tool. So if the government takes seriously consider of this July Charter, I think these things will be changed within very shorter period.
I think we answered all three questions. Any? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Murshid Hasib. I work for Channel 24. So you've been to many polling stations when the vote was going on. Any particular constituency or any particular center you want to mention which seems to be really a good one for the example in the upcoming days while the voting was going on and the counting was going on? You want to mention? And as the number is pretty low in terms of women participation from the political rallies or in the participation of election towards whatever the result had come, how the political party really needs to get over or get out their hangover of to bring more participation from the women.
So we have two questions, maybe.
Thank you for your question. I will start with your second question. Regarding the women participation, we have observed like it is still underrepresented in candidacy regarding women political participation. And in case of women participation in politics and in the community level, so compared to previous elections and the current elections background, the environment, we have seen like a good amount of women participation through the political parties, and they have been empowered by civil society organizations. Yes, in the future elections, the political parties and also the CSOs and other organizations, they have the responsibility to empower women in a larger manner. Regarding your first question, should I? Yeah.
For the first question, I think it'll be difficult to give one specific polling station. So I'll give specific procedures that we found were very consistently good and potentially consistently needs to be improved upon. So what we saw as a consistently good thing was that in terms of procedures, I think 90% of the polling stations we went to had really good procedures. So a lot of them followed with what was required under our electoral process in the RPO. The consistent issue that we found across all polling stations is accessibility. So I think that's the problem that we're looking into right now. How could we make sure that despite structural barriers, because of course it's hard to build new schools and classrooms, so what are ways that the EC can actually do to make accessible polling stations better, to make polling stations more accessible? So we'll have recommendations there, but part of what we're looking at is maybe creating temporary accessible polling booths that might make it easier for the elderly, persons with disabilities, to vote instead of forcing them to go up a few flights of stairs.
But just to add also, because he's asking for a recommendation for women to improve representation. Taking a look at the July Charter also, so I would suggest, or ANFREL would suggest, institutionalize it within the system. Because there should be an affirmative action from women's candidacy within parties and elections. So the system in the July Charter, right now it's unicameral, it will be bicameral. Put a system that require political parties to meet minimum targets for nominating women. Should be institutionalized. Take advantage of the reform window which you can introduce that kind of system.
Carlo, you want to add anything?
And I think this is also why we stress the importance of electoral accountability. So electoral accountability covers so many aspects, but I'd like to show you why it also is important for women participation. Across many stakeholders that we talk to, there are two main issues emerging as why women are not participating as candidates. One is violence, not just physical violence, but also digital violence. The second is financing. So I think what we're looking, so these are two issues that we feel like if you have electoral accountability lessening violence, you might have more women participating because running for elections won't be as intimidating. At the same time, if you have stronger accountability when it comes to campaign finance, then running for elections might not be as costly as well. So that's why we're stressing the importance of accountability, because it touches on so many aspects of the election. One, of course, is women participation as well, and marginalized participation.
Yes, we still have time, so if you have more questions, please feel free to raise those.
So during the campaign, I'm sorry, as none of my brothers are interested. So during the campaign, it seems that the fight between the candidates on the virtual world was absolutely high. It was quite an enormous boosting in the Facebook, TikTok, or wherever the social platform is. Do you think the Election Commission had the ability to stop it, or you know, just simple question?
I'll take, yeah. Can I answer already? It's been a problem across the region. It's really hard. Because the problem arises not only from election administration. Because if we will take a look also with the different social media platforms, you can only track that in Facebook, through Facebook ad transparency. And you cannot track that in other social media platforms. So it takes two to tango. It's not only election administration or election commission. Of course, there should be a stronger mechanism when it comes to tracking the expenses with regard to digital expenses. It's really hard. Even the advanced countries is having a hard time to do that. But it's good to start now. Start from the local expenses and also start the digital expenses tracking as well.
Yes, we have one more question, one more gentleman behind.
Just to add, Brisa, I think, yes, it is very challenging for tracking the campaign finance. I mean, most of the Asian countries, including Sri Lanka, my colleagues are here, so we do have a campaign finance law. The implementation is the big issue. The elections management, for me, election management should have some mechanism to observe the campaign ceiling. But at the same time, I wish to encourage the civil society also should engage with the elections management body to establish the implementation mechanism. Law itself doesn't make any sense. The many countries do have the law. I think Brisa do have a good example in Philippines as well. I can remember here in 2008, I think 5 taka for one voter during that period. I don't know how this research report also come out with the data. It's very difficult because it's very difficult to locate the expenses unless if there is a proper mechanism. So that has to establish with the civil society by the elections management body.
Yeah, thank you, Rohana. Let's go for the next question. Yeah.
Hello, this is me, Ahmed Reza, and I work for television named Jomuna. So I have a couple of questions regarding the evaluation of election commission works, as we know that there are 3 election, they have had an allegation regarding their activities. So how do you evaluate this time for their activities from election commission? So the second question is about if you think about the social media perspective and if you think about the South Asian region, more or less, so it's a bit challenging to operate any kind of thing or campaign also. So how did you find that particular thing, especially when you talk about the social media, is it bit it was bit challenging for you to monitor, as because day before the election, we saw that there are several rumors was ongoing on the social media platform, and on the election day we saw that there are a couple of hypes or vibes was ongoing for a particular party. So how, what have you done on that day regarding social media issues?
Regarding your first question, in terms of election administration, of course, I would start that there's no election that is perfect. You cannot find that in any other jurisdictions. The Election Commission really did well. We are banking on the efforts that we did for the past year. We saw how they evolved also. Because at first, when we were communicating with them, of course, they're not that open at first, but it improved. It opened to a lot of opportunities after a year, and they did well in preparing the entire elections. And for social media, it's really possible. I mean, it's not really hard to do social media monitoring when you have good methodology and if you also know the limitations and the scope of your monitoring. Because you cannot do all and monitor all social media accounts. The most effective is you do random sampling and you know the size, so that would be very effective. So for ANFREL part, so we used Junkipedia tool. So we used the Junkipedia tool to do social media monitoring. So we collated all of the official and affiliate social media accounts of targeted and identified political actors, including political party, candidates, activists, journalists, civil society organizations, and fact-checking organizations. So we have coded for about 9,000, and we have monitored and tracked 905 social media accounts to assess the nature of key actors' speech in the digital campaign environment. So it's not really hard. Just invest in tool and learn the proper methodology on how to do social media monitoring, because it varies in different contexts as well. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions from the media colleagues? Okay, so with that, I think we would like to conclude.
Sorry, just one last. Before we conclude, we would like to, of course, acknowledge our development partner, our institutional donor, and the Australian High Commission for trusting ANFREL to do this election observation mission. And of course, to our media colleagues and at the same time development partners, the joint press conference of civil society organizations will just happen beside this hall. So it will just be right after this press con. So Adhikar, BSCAN, RUPSA, and RC Trust will take place today at 12 o'clock. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, ANFREL final report will be released in the, it will take a couple of months. So we will, when the ANFREL final report is out, so we will all disseminate the report with our development partners and then the media and then the others. Yes. Thank you very much for joining with us today.